Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts line setter Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 42 event, which takes place in Albuquerque, New Mexico. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 6 bouts out of the 11 fights on the card. Now, briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package for UFC Fight Night 41 as well as the Ultimate Fighter Brazil 3 finale ended up going 3-0 to profit 8.325 units overall. We won our underdog play on CB Dalloway as well as a straight bet on Antonio Carlos Jr., and then we also hit a parlay that included Gegard Mousasi and the over in the Ernest Chavez-Elias Silverio fight. On top of that, we also were profitable in our free play, which was a parlay that included Abreu and Kevin Souza on the preliminary card for the Ultimate Fighter Brazil finale. Now back to the present, UFC Fight Night 42 features a whopping 11 fights in total and will be aired on a mixture of UFC Fight Pass and Fox Sports 1 this Saturday night. Now let's dive right in. Kicking off the card on UFC Fight Pass is a light heavyweight contest between Patrick Cummins, who is 4-1 overall, taking on Roger Narvaez, who is 6-0. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Cummins minus 315, Narvaez plus 235 was my opener. Right now, Cummins is at minus 325 and Narvaez is at plus 265. So not much action, a little bit more favoritism coming in towards Cummins in this spot. Not surprised. I mean, you're dealing with a powerful light heavyweight, natural light heavyweight, against basically a middleweight taking this fight on shorter notice, looking to get his UFC debut in just to, get his chance in the UFC, put it that way. So Narvaez was training for a fight, on Access TV against Bubba Bush. So he has been in training camp and preparing himself against kind of a similar skill set than Cummins, but make no mistake, I mean, Cummins, his wrestling credentials speak for themselves. I mean, he's a tremendous grappler, a powerful guy. Again, he's going to have the physical size and strength advantage over Narvaez. And I think that's what's probably going to win him the fight because technically speaking, Narvaez is, I think, a little bit better overall. I think, as far as standing goes, Narvaez isn't really, a crazy effective striker, but at the same time, I still think he's a little bit more technically sound than Cummins is on the feet. Narvaez is a southpaw. He's a long rangey striker. He pulls out a jab basically to follow up and close the gap. He looks for takedowns as well. So that's what makes this kind of stylistically a bad matchup for him. He's not going to be able to out wrestle Cummins, and Cummins does have, the ability to put Narvaez on his back, get positional control and make life, very hard and difficult for Narvaez. So I think that's what's basically going to happen. If it does stay standing for a long period of time, I think Cummins' defense is very questionable, and Narvaez might, even though he's not a crazy effective striker, I think he can do some damage there. So that's where the interesting part takes place here, because Narvaez, even though he is, again, natural, he's been fighting at middleweight, I think he's going to fill out nicely and at least on the feet can make things interesting as far as power goes, because Cummins' defense, again, and his chin, not too great from what we've seen. Now, again, granted, his first debut fight was against Daniel Cormier, so you got to cut the guy a little bit of slack, but still, as I said in that fight, I mean, Cummins is just not that impressive to me. I mean, I think he's the type of fighter that can make some waves and get progress in his UFC career if he gets the right matchups. And I think that's what kind of the UFC's doing for him here. I think they're giving him a bone when Narvaez, and I think he's supposed to win this fight, and he should win this fight. So I'm going to pick Cummins to win because, again, he's a little bit more powerful. He should be able to dictate where the fight goes and probably end up finishing Narvaez on the ground or at least grind him out for decision. But I don't have that much confidence in Cummins. As far as laying 3-1 juice, I don't think that's a very smart idea, honestly. So for me, as far as bet goes, I would recommend a pass on this fight.
Now looking at this one, I'm going to agree that Cummins should definitely win, but it's not as clear cut. Narvaez while he is a middleweight that's moving up on short notice to take this fight, he is still 6'3". I mean, he's a big guy, and he shouldn't be too much outsized here against Cummins. The problem, of course, for Narvas is the way he fights. He likes to slow things down, grind him to a halt a little bit, use his wrestling, get on top, maybe work for submissions, get a little ground and pound in, and wear guys down. And that's not going to work here. Cummins was a standout wrestler at Penn State. You know, he's a talented grappler, and he's a spectacular athlete, and he's extremely, extremely powerful with his strikes. I think what's going to happen instead is Narvas might try to get a hold of Cummins, maybe try to get him to the canvas. It's not going to work, and he's going to get frustrated because Narvas does not have very good stand-up ability at all. I think Cummins should be able to outwork him on the feet, even though neither guy is really that good in open space. And more often than not, Cummins is probably going to use that strength advantage, even though he doesn't have the size advantage. The strength will definitely come into play, and Cummins will most likely get on top, and that's when he'll really start laying the pain with his ground and pound. So, overall, I think that even though Narvas was training for a fight around this time period, and he had a full training camp, I think Patrick Cummins should clearly win this fight. He's definitely the better fighter, and I think he's going to come through probably in flying colors, although you never really know just because he was finished so quickly in his last fight, even if it was against Cormier. But my pick is Patrick Cummins. Now dropping down to the lightweight division, we have John Tuck, who is 7-1 overall, taking on Jake Lindsay, who is 9-0. So Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Tuck opens minus 140. The comeback on Lindsay, even money, looking over at 5 dimes right now. Tuck is actually minus 155. Lindsay plus 135. So a little bit more support coming in on Tuck. Not really surprised. I mean, the guy is definitely the more popular, the more well-rounded fighter, the more experienced fighter. The guy has a ton of potential. I mean, I've been on his bandwagon for a while. I mean, the guy has so much ability. He just hasn't really lived up to it. And, you know, a big part of that is actually his cardio. That's what drives me nuts about Tuck. I mean, on the feet, he's talented. He's dangerous. I mean, he actually has good hands. He doesn't use them and throw them enough. But at the same time, he can be effective. I mean, he has a little bit of unorthodox striking. I mean, he mixes in kicks well. He has a nice jumping knee attack that he times pretty well. So he's dangerous in the stand-up aspect. And then if you get Tuck to the ground, I mean, he operates well from top position. Of course, I mean, he's got really slick BJJ, but even off his back, he could threaten to finish fights as well. He's got a slick armbar set up. He's very fast and moves very fluid on the ground, period. So he manages more times than not to end up getting top position. So he's a very well-rounded competitor. It's just the problem is with Tuck, again, it drives me crazy, is after round one, the guy's a completely different fighter. So a lot of guys that aren't up to his skill level and up to par with Tuck, if they can hang in there and weather the early storm and have decent sub-defense, I think, it push a pace like Lindsay actually will do here, have a chance to actually beat Tuck, even though Tuck is the better fighter. So Lindsay is making his UFC debut. He's a late replacement for Sedano. And primarily he's a grappling-based fighter. I mean, he's a well-rounded prospect. He's still improving his overall game. He's got decent wrestling, decent takedowns in his own right. Top control is pretty good. He's got good ground and pound. On the feet, he's not the most technical striker, but he does have some power. Now, he is still very raw, but he likes to kind of pull out, again, his lead jab to find range and then follow up with some big power punches. So even though Tuck might have the advantage, pure advantage on the feet, I think Lindsay can definitely pack a punch and land effectively when he does start to push the pace a little bit more as this fight progresses. So I think there's actually some advantages here for Lindsay. I mean, you know, again, it's a tough fight to make your debut against a very talented fighter like Tuck, but after round one, if Lindsay can weather that early storm, I think Lindsay does push that type of pace that in round two and round three, he's going to be the more effective fighter. I think he could, again, come forward, land some heavier punches. I think he has the ability to put Tuck on his back, especially, again, in round two and round three. Tuck's easier to plant on his backside. And I think Lindsay, if he avoids the submission game and neutralizes that a little bit, he's got a pretty effective, savvy submission game in his own right. So I think he could have some success success on the ground, at least control Tuck. So anywhere this fight takes place, especially as the fight progresses, I think Lindsay can start taking control, and he could very well be a live dog here. But I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit and just almost fade Tuck's cardio more than anything else. And it is a tough spot here. Because again, Lindsay is taking this fight on short notice. He is a late replacement fighter, but I still think he still has more to offer in a 3-round fight than Tuck does, unfortunately. So, I'm gonna pick Lindsay to pull off the slight upset here.
Looking at this one, it really comes down to exactly what Nick said, the cardio. John Tuck is more talented than Lindsay, to be honest. Like, if you put these guys, skill for skill, I think Tuck is a little bit better on the ground. He's a little bit better with wrestling, and he's a little bit better in terms of fluidity in his striking. Tuck mixes it up pretty well on the feet. He throws a lot of kicks. He throws them low. He throws them to the body. He throws them to the head. He can throw all types of kicks, and he's actually a pretty powerful striker as well. His problem is he's not the most accurate guy. He doesn't throw things very quickly. They're a little easier to see, so most fighters are able to defend his attacks very well. And of course, his hugest problem, as Nick mentioned, is the cardio. The guy does not keep up the pace. He likes to set a torrid pace, and he sets a pace that he can't keep. Now, granted, he's training at the MMA lab. That could be improving. So we can give him a little bit of a benefit of the doubt here, but that is a huge concern. And Lindsay, he actually is a pretty powerful guy. I mean, he came into his last fight as an underdog and just steamrolled, got a very impressive first round TKO finish after dropping his opponent with a straight right. Now, Lindsay isn't quite as diverse with Tuck in terms of using kicks, but when he is up close and personal in a fight in the clinch, he uses knees very well. And from a distance, while he doesn't have the fluidity, he wastes a little bit of motion when he's striking. He does hit very hard. He has a lot of TKOs on his record. He's a heavy hitter. And my one problem with Lindsay is he's not quite there yet as a complete type of fighter, and he's not a full-time fighter. You know, he has the nickname the Librarian, and he got it for a reason, because he actually is a librarian on the side. So I would like to see him start training more full-time and focus 100% on his career, especially now that he's in the UFC. And he might have done that. A lot of fighters really do switch to full-time the second they get that call. But overall, I think as long as Tuck has taken care of some of that cardio, then maybe he wins this fight on 51 to 55% of the time. So he is a bigger favorite than I would like, and but I'm gonna slightly lean John Tuck here, and there's not a lot of confidence here because especially the way that he slows down in fights. Moving down to the flyweight division, we have Scott Jorgenson, who is 14-8 overall, taking on Danny Martinez, who is 17-5. So Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Jorgenson minus 215, the comeback on Martinez plus 165 was my opener. Jorgenson is now sitting at minus 240. Martinez is sitting at plus 200. So a little bit more action coming in Jorgenson's way, but not, a ton of action to make the line move like that. These lines are fairly fresh. I should mention that as well. So, it is Jorgenson's fight to win or lose. I know he's coming off that disappointing performance, that surprising loss actually. But at the same time, I think Jorgenson overall, it's a tough matchup for Martinez. Martinez has a solid wrestling base. He does push forward. He can be very aggressive. But you know what? Everything he does, I think Jorgenson does a little bit better. Martinez does have the slight youth advantage here. He's going to have a couple inches of pure height. He's got that going for him. But again, I think effectiveness on the feet, Jorgenson's the better striker. I think Jorgenson's going to be able to stuff a lot of the takedowns Martinez has to offer as well. And I think he's going to be able to outpoint Martinez overall. So this is a difficult matchup. I mean, Martinez, the poor guy, he's getting his UFC debut. He had to fight Caroway, and now he's got to fight Jorgenson. So they're back-to-back difficult matchups for him. But I'm expecting him to be competitive like he always is. I mean, Martinez is a very game fighter and a very well-rounded fighter. So you have a battle of two well-rounded flyweights that are going to be, again, extremely competitive back and forth, but you got to say that Jorgenson is the better fighter in almost every aspect of the game. Again, he's kind of been a little bit disappointing because of his little streak of momentum that he's had lately, but I think Jorgenson can get back on track, and this is a very winnable fight. So, barring any kind of unforeseen mistake that Jorgenson makes, I think Martinez is going to have a hard time catching him. So you got to think that Jorgenson's going to win this fight. So I think Jorgenson probably grinds out a decision win here.
And I agree. I think looking at these guys in terms of overall offensive skills, Jorgenson is just clearly more well-rounded and has faced significantly better competition than Danny Martinez. I mean, granted, Martinez did fight Dominic Cruz back in the day in WEC, but overall, though, Jorgenson time in and time out has stepped in there against guys that are currently in the top 10, almost everybody in the top 10. I mean, he's hands down an experienced veteran. Now, that does come at a cost. Jorgenson has started to take a little bit of toll. His chin is starting to go. But I really don't think that Danny Martinez's striking ability will be able to keep up pace here. Now, overall, I think Martinez as a fighter, he is a very good offensive wrestler, but that's about where his talent ends. Most of his stand-up skill is about winging haymakers, just to try to close the distance so that he can get a hold of his opponents, and then that'll give him a chance to take them down, whether it's by body lock or by a shot. So it's more of his striking is a distraction than anything. And Jorgenson, he's definitely the superior striker. He can be composed in there. He's lost a bit of a step. He's not that quick anymore, but he's still, a very talented guy with a lot of power and some good submission ability. So you got to watch out for Jorgenson pretty much anywhere this fight goes. I think Jorgenson will be at his best in open space here. He should be able to land some decent punches, maybe a couple kicks. And I think what it's going to come down to is whether or not Martinez can take Jorgenson down and keep him down. And I really don't think that that's going to happen. Martinez is 3 years younger, but Jorgenson just consistently has faced the elite fighters in the UFC, and that's why he's been on that bit of a rough patch that he's been on. I think he's lost about 5 of his last 6 fights in the UFC. But I do think that Martinez is a big step down for him, and barring a fluky kind of big haymaker punch connecting for Martinez, or Jorgenson dropping off a lot more than I expect. I mean, I do think that he is starting to decline, but not at enough level yet to lose to Martinez. So I'm picking Scott Jorgenson, and he should be able to roll here.
Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Bobby Volker, who is 24-11, taking on Lance Benoist, who is 6-2. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Volker minus 130, Benoist minus 110 was my opening line. I'm looking over at 5 dimes right now. Volker's minus 145, plus 125 in Benoist. So a little bit more action coming in on Volker. Benoist has been out for 2 years, or a little bit around that time, since 2012, I believe. So that's kind of scary right there. I mean, he was out with a broken leg. Injuries is what sidelined him, but he was actually a pretty solid prospect coming into the UFC, no doubt about it. And he has a ton of potential because he's such a well-rounded fighter. He's got a decent underrated striking game. He's got some power on the feet. He's got pretty good wrestling, offensive wrestling, some good takedowns, some good jiu-jitsu, some good top control, good ground and pound. So you pretty much get a complete package with Benoist. But the problem with him, what I've noticed, is sometimes he tends to fade as the fight goes on a little bit, and he starts giving up positional control once in a while. He'll start getting tagged back on the feet once in a while. He just starts fading to the point where he lets people get back into the fight. And Volker, of course, is it's one tough SOB, no doubt about it. We all know what he's made of. I mean, he's the type of guy that has the cardio to go on and on for days, it seems like. I mean, he's got so much heart. He's really not particularly good in any area. He's just one of these grinders. He has a little bit of underrated striking in his own right, Volker does. He's got solid wrestling, wrestling takedown defense as well to go along with it. Decent grappling. He doesn't really showcase it enough, but he's a pretty well-rounded, put-together fighter himself. So this should be a battle. But I'm leaning slightly more towards Benoist. I'm a little worried and concerned with the layoff. Like I said, he's been out for a couple years. But these guys do match up well. I think Benoist can do a little bit more damage on the feet. I think that he is just a little bit slightly above Volker at this stage in their career. He's got the youth advantage on his side to go along with it. So I'm expecting Benoist to rebound here. He has a winnable fight in front of him, Volker. But the problem is with Benoist, he does tend to have competitive fights. So with Volker and with his heart, I'm expecting this fight to kind of take place in all areas. And Volker's going to push back, and he's going to make it an interesting fight. So this is basically a coin flip type of pick'em fight in my opinion. And I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit. Even with the time off, I'm going to pick Benoist to win this fight.
And I'm gonna slightly disagree. I completely agree that this is a very close fight, but One thing that really stands out for me in terms of it is the layoff. Benoist has not fought since September of 2012, which is so long ago, over a year and a half, and he didn't look good in his last 2 UFC fights. I mean, he had a great debut. He beat Matt Riddle, but then he lost to Sean Pearson. He lost to Seth Baczynski. Didn't look so hot in any of those fights. They were competitive, but it just wasn't that impressive. And obviously Bobby Volker has not looked great either in his last couple of fights, but he's been in there against a couple of killers. I mean, Robbie Lawler and then William Macario, a really hot shot kid out of the tough Brazil scene. And basically what matters to me is I think Benoist is going to be really rusty. Neither of these guys are particularly super skilled, but at least Volker's been active. And while he got the crap kicked out of him in his last 2 fights, I really don't see Benoist as a huge, technical masterpiece guy on the feet. And Volker likes to keep fights standing, and he usually can keep them there. And sometimes he's a little too tough for his own good. So I can see Volker taking some punishment early. Maybe Benoist starts strong. But as Nick mentioned, Benoist does slow down a little bit as the fight goes on, and Volker actually gets stronger. He's just this scrappy kid that's full of heart, and he charges forward and wings punches and eats punches to give out punches, and sometimes he wears people down, like in his Roger Bowling trilogy. And I think that we'll see a similar type of fight here where Benoist maybe even takes him down in the first round, works him over a little bit, and then slows down, and Volker takes over and maybe gets a decision by winning the last 2 rounds, or maybe Volker can even get a late stoppage. But I'm gonna take a stab on Bobby Volker, even though he's 10 years older. So, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they're kind of slapping. I mean, you got 2 guys with their backs against the wall. They're coming off a lot of losses in a row. But the one that leaps off the page is 10-year age difference. Bobby Volker is getting on in the years, and his career stat line is not good, just against his peer group. He has a lot of stats that are below average. Benoist, so when I line these 2 guys up, Benoist gets the check mark all the way down the line. Well, not all the way, but a lot of the variables lean Benoist, and he is the much younger, and he's the southpaw in this fight. So from a purely statistical level, Benoist has been more efficient in his minutes in the octagon and in Strikeforce compared to Bobby Volker. So I mean, from a statistical standpoint, you gotta lean Benoist. He makes for a very interesting underdog upset play. But you're right, the layoff is a big concern. That flips the equation going the other way. Guys who are out that long do not tend to live up to potential, when it comes to winning or against the line. So, there's factors on both sides of the equation here. We could see a sloppy fight. The safe bet might just be the over. To see these guys kind of grind it out. Benoist getting back into the game, but neither guy able or with the offensive weaponry to put away the other. But there is enough evidence, at least from what I see, to support a potential upset play.
Now dropping back down to the bantamweight division, we have Yeltsin Mesa, who is 19-9 overall, taking on Sergio Pettis, who is 10-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Pettis minus 315, Mesa plus 235. That was my opener. And looking at the Don Best screen right now, Pettis is climbing as we speak. He's at minus 440 actually at 5 times. And across the board, he's just over 4-1. Obviously I opened it a little bit low. I should have figured. I mean, Pettis has that hype behind him. And he's got the it factor. I mean, the guy's definitely a very talented guy. In all aspects of the fight game, and he keeps on improving. I mean, the guy's only 20 years old to begin with, and Mesa is actually 33, so bigger upside for Pettis. And this is a tough spot for Mesa. I mean, he's going to have to actually take Pettis down, control him on the mat, and try to out-grapple him in order to win this fight. And that's going to not be an easy task. I mean, Pettis is going to continue again to improve that wrestling game, that takedown defense. He is a little bit vulnerable on the ground, though, as far as getting put on his back at times. It is a possibility, so I think that's where Mesa is going to have his opportunities. But Pettis, once you get him on the floor, I mean, the guy's a pretty great submission whiz off his back as well. And he manages to scramble up and even has some decent reversals as well. So Pettis not going to be easy to hold down. And on the feet, I mean, he does have that speed advantage. He's just a little sniper. I mean, Mesa's going to get lit up on the feet. So this is Pettis' fight again to win or lose. I really don't see Mesa winning this fight, and I understand why everybody's coming in on Pettis, and they're probably going to continue. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this line close around 5-1 or so. I do think you got to be cautious, though. I mean, Pettis again, he's shown a little bit of vulnerability on the ground, even though he has that slick BJJ. And you never know. Mesa, I think, tends to get a little bit disrespected overall from the general MMA community. And the guy's probably a little bit better than we all think, but at the same time, I mean, Pettis is that special type of fighter that you like to see, and you could expect big things from him. So I think he's going to rebound here well. Coming off that loss to Caceres, Pettis is going to rebound well, and he has something to prove. So he's going to be very motivated, without a doubt. And it's his fight to win or lose. So hard to pick against Pettis. I do think he's the better fighter, and he should come through.
And I completely agree. This fight actually has a tremendous age gap with Mesa at 33 years old and Pettis at 20. That's just ridiculous. And if this fight stays standing, it's going to be a world of pain for Yeltsin Mesa. As we saw in his UFC debut against Chad Mendes, he got absolutely obliterated by a huge shot from Mendes. And in dropping down here to 135, he's had his ups and downs, but in this fight, he is going to have a huge, huge problem if he cannot get this fight to the canvas. Sergio Pettis is a very good striker. He's clearly putting in the time. He's definitely improving. He has some very nasty kicks and technical ability and some decent punching power. He's just a really good young talent. Now, he might have had a little bit too much too soon in his last fight against Alex Caceres, but that was a competitive fight all the way up until the end, right before he got submitted. So I think that if this fight stays standing, Pettis is going to absolutely crush him. If it goes to the canvas, it'll get a little more interesting. Pettis is a pretty solid ground fighter. He has decent wrestling of his own and some pretty good submission skills, but I think Mesa should be a little bigger, a little stronger. Honestly, Pettis, I'm surprised that he hasn't tried to fight at flyweight in the UFC yet, but maybe he's just a little concerned about growing into his body a little more because he is 20 years old. So, but on the canvas, I think Mesa might be able to overpower him a little bit, wear him down. So this will all come down to whether Mesa can get this fight to the canvas, and I really don't think he can. He's not that explosive, and if Pettis has as good a footwork as his brother, or even close to as good a footwork as his brother, he should be able to avoid letting Mesa close the distance and get his hands on him and take this fight to the canvas where he could potentially have some advantages. So I'm definitely picking Sergio Pettis here to get a good rebound fight.
Sticking with the bantamweight division, we are moving on to a battle between Eric Perez, who is 14-5, taking on Brian Caroway, who is 18-7. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, I opened Perez minus 150 to come back on Caroway plus 110. A very competitive fight in my mind. On paper it is as well. Looking at the footage, it should be a doozy. Caroway, he's starting to earn a little bit more respect from the MMA community, the betting community as well. I mean, the guy, you can definitely see some improvements in his game. And the guy has a tremendous underrated wrestling and grappling edge over most people that he faces, especially at 135. And he's starting to improve and get more confidence on his feet. So Caroway's becoming a very complete fighter. And he's starting to believe in himself a little bit more as well. That's one thing mentally I've always kind of been a concern for me, at least with Caroway when you're dealing with him, because mentally he's not always there, but you can see the progress even in that aspect of his game. So that's very promising. Perez, on the other hand, he came in with a ton of hype into the UFC. He performed relatively well. The guy, I mean, he was a beast on the feet. We all know he's got tremendous knockout power, but he's dangerous in all aspects of the game. I mean, he's definitely a finisher. And with that hype behind him, actually in his last couple performances, there's been a little bit more of a letdown. I mean, he did look good, against Figueroa. I should say that in his most recent performance. But, I mean, overall, I think, people are not as sold on Perez as they once were, if that makes sense. But he did have a competitive loss in his decision loss to Mizugaki as well, and he's looked okay. And I think he's young enough. He's only 24 years old, if I'm not mistaken. He's young enough that he's going to constantly improve his overall game. He's going to take big strides and leaps, working with a camp like Jackson's, of course. And this is in his backyard. I'm expecting this fight, another very competitive fight, to take place in all over the octagon. I mean, we're going to see some interesting grappling exchanges. We're going to see some interesting exchanges on the feet, but I actually give the slight edge in most areas to Perez. I mean, the pure wrestling is going to be interesting because Caroway's such a good grappler. I can see Caroway having a slight advantage there, but I think Perez, as far as the jiu-jitsu goes, he's going to be just as dangerous as Caroway. I mean, he could definitely finish things by submission. And on the feet, I do give the advantage still, this pure striking, the pure power, the pure aggression advantage to Perez. I mean, the guy's nasty. He does tend to fade a little bit as the fight goes on, but I think he's kind of answered some questions or concerns that I've had with him, and he's going to become a more consistent fighter as he grows and matures in age as well. So it is going to be a competitive fight, another toss-up, but I'm slightly leaning towards Perez in this one.
And this is a situation where I'm going to slightly disagree again. I just think that this might be, again, a situation where Perez is getting a little too much too soon again. UFC had done a really good job of building him up, but then they threw him in there too quickly against Takeya Mitsugaki, and he got outworked and lost a competitive decision. And I think, only one fight removed from that bout where he got a nice solid victory using his wrestling. Now they're throwing him in there again against another really talented guy in Brian Caroway. So that's a concern for me. I'm not sure that he's ready. Maybe he is. Maybe he'll pass this with flying colors. But looking at this fight for me, I see Caroway having a big advantage in terms of wrestling. I do think Perez has done a nice job working with his wrestling and improving it. But Caroway definitely should still have the advantage there. That's where he's always been the most dangerous. And while Perez does have some really nifty submission skills, he has some solid Brazilian jiu-jitsu. He's tapped out a couple guys now in the UFC. I think that Caroway should have the advantage there as well. He uses very good top control. He wears his opponents down, and then he gets late finishes. He's actually scored 2 third-round submissions already in the UFC and a second-round submission in his UFC debut. So he's the type of guy that you can never count out of a fight, even if he losing it early. And I think Perez, his cardio is a little bit of a question mark. That is a concern. And where this fight will start, and where Perez probably wants to keep it, is on the feet. And I do think that Perez is more dangerous there. He's not nearly as technical as I thought he was, because Mitsugaki was able to carve him up a little bit. But Perez does have a lot of power. He still has some nice, diverse attacks. He throws some good kicks. He throws some good knees. He has some big, powerful hands. And if you clip Brian Caroway, you can definitely finish him off. But I'm not quite sure he'll be able to, because he is always going to have that threat of the takedown, so maybe Perez will have to hold back a little bit. And I think that more often than not, Caroway will be able to enact that game plan of taking Perez down, and his offensive wrestling and top control should be able to neutralize Perez's submission skills. So I'm leaning Brian Caroway this time around. So, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I think the theme here is that Caroway is great at getting submissions. That's how he wins. But he's not so great at winning decisions. His efficiency rating is negative. That means basically his opponents tend to outwork him. But when he gets a lock, that ends the fight. Perez, on the other hand, is better at winning decisions. He has a far better positive efficiency rating. He's better at outworking people, landing more strikes, doing more damage. So you mentioned where the battleground really is who's going to get submitted and who's going to have the advantage taking this to the ground. Both guys have very good takedown defense. I don't think Perez is going to be able to take Caroway down and submit him. But both of them are used to being the one in control. So someone's, oh must go, or someone's really good record on the mat has to disappear after this fight. I think Caroway is probably the more dangerous grappler. The concern is that if he fails to get this to the ground, I think he might be at a disadvantage with his hands. And that's, you mentioned the knockout power. Currently, Eric Perez's knockdown rate is way high. It is higher than the heavyweight average. He has 3 knockdowns, punch for punch. That's an 8% knockdown rate. That's very good. So he has been getting it done on the feet. His accuracy is okay. His pace is okay, but it's the power that pops off the page. And on the flip side, Brian Caroway's defense is actually quite low. He tends to eat punches, and that's probably because he's coming forward and going for takedowns. So I see either Perez getting the better on the feet or Caroway being the more dangerous guy on the mat if he can get it there. It is, as the odds imply, it's a very close matchup. But there is maybe some finishing potential here because both guys are dangerous in different ways.
Now returning to the lightweight division, we have Yves Edwards, who is 42-20-1 with 1 no contest, taking on Piotr Homan, who is 14-2 overall. Now Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Homan minus 175, Edwards plus 135. That was my opener. And again, looking over at the screen, it's Homan minus 175. Comeback on Edwards plus 155 right now. And it's about steady across the board, about $1.75 or so. So not much movement. I mean, it looks like a fair spot to open. Now you got to give the advantages a little bit to Homan in this spot. It is going to be a very competitive fight. I mean, Edwards, he's looked good overall. I mean, I think all of us are expecting his chin to keep letting him down, but that hasn't been the fact. I mean, if you look at some of the people that he's been in there with in the UFC, I mean, yes, granted he has been KO'd, he has been knocked out recently, but at the same time, his chin has held up, and he's been more than competitive in his fights as well. Because Edwards is just such a well-rounded veteran. I mean, he's been around for a long time. He's faced some of the best competition there is to face throughout his career. And the guy, again, he's just a complete fighter. I mean, anywhere the fight takes place, Edwards is great on the feet. He's got some good underrated wrestling skill, offensively and defensively. He's got good BJJ, and he's got decent takedown defense overall as well. So, Edwards is a pretty hard guy to deal with. I mean, he is getting up there in age. I believe he's 37 years old. And again, Homan's going to have the youth advantage. I mean, I think he's only 26 years old. So he's going to be the fresher fighter coming in, against a very battle-tested Edwards. Now, I do think that Homan's overall game and his overall pressure, he's not a huge striker on the feet. I actually think Edwards is the better fighter. As far as technically speaking, he can make things up a little bit more versed in the striking attack, and he can be a little bit more effective. But it doesn't take much for Homan. I mean, he does have a little bit of power, and I think he can possibly catch Edwards' chin on the feet if it does stay standing for a long period of time. As far as grappling goes, I think it's going to be very close, but I give the slight edge again on the ground even to Homan. I think offensively, he's going to probably struggle to get Edwards on the ground, but I think he can, once it does hit the floor, maintain and get top position. I don't think he's going to get submitted by Edwards' BJJ, so I think he's going to probably be able to push enough of a pace up against the cage, clinch up a little bit, and just kind of bully Edwards around as the fight kind of progresses here, and possibly even stop Edwards, like I said, on the feet. There is that possibility as well. And that being said, I just basically told you guys how much respect I have for Edwards. So it's not going to be an easy task. This is a very, very competitive fight, but I do lean towards Homan. I think, again, he's just going to come back and rebound well and get that W, a much-needed, respectful W over Edwards. And I think it's going to be his ability to actually push the pace, to dictate where the fight goes, and, again, be a little bit more of the fresher, more youthful fighter.
This is a really tricky fight for me, mainly because I think Yves Edwards is the better overall fighter, but Homan's 11 years younger. That's a ridiculous age gap. We've actually got multiple fights here where there are huge age gaps on the card, but this is a tricky one because while Edwards is still extremely talented overall, his chin is starting to give out on him a little bit. We saw it in the Sam Stout fight. We saw it in the Medeiros fight. So it is something to really keep an eye on. Now, is Piotr Homan as good a striker as those guys? I'm not quite convinced. On the feet, Homan, he's a little lackluster. I mean, he does have some power, but, I mean, there's really not a whole lot of technical about him. So I think that Edwards, if it stays standing, he should be able to outpoint him. And on the ground, I think Homan does have an advantage on the ground, but he's not that quick, and I think Edwards should be able to keep it standing if he wants to keep it standing. Now, Homan does have a pretty good submission edge. If he does get hurt and Edwards rushes in, Homan actually is a pretty good recovery, as we saw in his UFC debut, and he could present some problems there if Edwards lowers his defenses. But I think overall, this is Yves Edwards' fight to lose. He just needs to not get clipped and not make any dumb mistakes, because he can't afford to at this point in his career. One misstep, and he could be in for some trouble. So I'm going to pick Yves Edwards, but you just never know with a 37-year-old chin in the lightweight division after obviously 64, at least, that are counted professional fights. So I'm picking Edwards, but not a lot of confidence in it. But we'll see what happens on fight night.
Now, sticking with the lightweight division, we have Rafael dos Anjos, who is 20-7, taking on Jason High, who is 19-4 overall. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Dos Anjos minus 215. The comeback on the high plus 165 was the original opener. Dos Anjos is now sitting at minus 300. So early support coming in on Dos Anjos, and it's been pretty steady. I understand why. I mean, if you look at this fight on paper, or through footage, you can obviously see that, no matter where this fight takes place, Dos Anjos should have an advantage. I mean, he got the Brazilian jiu-jitsu to neutralize Hai's grappling game. He's got a huge advantage when it comes to the stand-up game. I mean, Dos Anjos' striking continues to improve, and he can be very effective. And Hai is basically your typical grappler, type of grinding style fighter, so he needs to get the fight to the floor in most cases, but once he's there, he's pretty effective with his game. But, I mean, RDA typically, I mean, I know he got ragdolled in his last fight against Nurmagomedov, but typically RDA has pretty solid takedown defense, and he's not easy to get down and control at least, so he's got some decent offensive wrestling himself. But the interesting factor here for me is Hai is dropping down to 155 from the 170 weight class, and at 170 he was an outstanding wrestler. So I think Hai is going to be that much more dominant at 155. You know, it all depends, of course, on how well his weight cut goes and how he looks at weigh-ins and how well he's going to perform at 155. I understand that. So there's some question marks there, but I'm expecting Hai to do things the right way. He's very professional about his training and everything leading up to this point. I don't see why he wouldn't be making a proper weight cut to 155. So he's going to be a beast on the ground, definitely. And I think that's where I guess I'm a little skeptical with Dos Anjos here in this fight. I mean, because he has been controlled in the past by some outstanding wrestlers and people that have kind of high type of style, and that's exactly what Hai's going to look for. He's going to look to clinch up against the fence with Dos Anjos, shoot in for a double leg, get him down to the floor, control, try to pass, and work his BJJ. Now, of course, I'm not worried really too much about Hai getting a submission, but I am worried about that control a little bit. But make no mistake, Dos Anjos is a decent favorite for a reason. Again, he has the takedown defense to be able to keep the fight up, and if the fight does stay up, he can be more effective. What bothers me about Hai is definitely his chin. I mean, he's been chinny in the past. He's been knocked out a couple times throughout his career, but I mean, in devastating fashion. So, Dos Anjos can definitely land that knockout punch or kick, on the feet. And, that's a huge concern for Hai. I think he needs to really, be careful defensively on the feet and make sure he doesn't get clipped if, he has any chance at all to win this fight. But again, it's going to be interesting, competitive type of battle. If it does not end inside the distance for Dos Anjos, if he doesn't finish Hai, I'm expecting a very interesting decision here for sure. So I think Hai has an outside shot of actually stealing a decision if he doesn't get stopped. But, I mean, all indications are Dos Anjos is stylistically a bad matchup for him. So I think you got to pick Dos Anjos here. As far as betting goes, I would be cautious, though, laying that kind of juice, at least in Hai's lightweight debut. I think we got to kind of watch and see what happens and how he performs here.
Now, I completely agree. This fight is a very interesting stylistic matchup, mainly because Dos Anjos, while he has shown incredible improvement since making his UFC debut a while back, he still has had a bit of an issue with wrestlers so far in his career. Tyson Griffin had a competitive decision against him early, and then Clay Guida, halted his momentum a bit when they fought, broke his jaw, took him down repeatedly, and then most recently completely ragdolled by Nurmagomedov. And that's exactly the type of fighter that Jason Hai is. The problem here, of course, is that Hai really can't trade with him on the feet, so that's really not anything that Dos Anjos has to worry about. So he can come into this fight kind of like Gegard Mousasi did in his last fight and be entirely focused on the takedowns, lower his stance a little bit, and just worry about defending the takedown and then trying to put away Hai, because Hai's chin has failed him in the past. You saw him against Marius Saramskis in Dream. He was clipped by Eric Silva. Honestly, he's not a good striker whatsoever. And when he does get hit, things go bad. But when he is able to enact his game plan, he's very effective. He's very good with his wrestling. He gets takedowns. He has solid top position. He doesn't usually lay and pray. He works for advancing position. And he has some pretty tight submissions, especially his guillotine choke. So you really got to watch out for Jason Hai when he's on top. I don't think he'd be able to submit Dos Anjos, obviously, because Dos Anjos is a spectacular ground fighter, but Dos Anjos is not that great at getting back up once he is on the ground. So I would be very concerned if Hai is able to repeatedly take him down. And especially because he's dropping down from the welterweight division. He's been doing that successfully against welterweights. Now granted, Dos Anjos is a pretty big lightweight, but that doesn't matter. If he can take down welterweights, he might be able to take down Dos Anjos. Now going back to Dos Anjos a little bit, his striking has improved drastically. He has some really big power in both hands, especially that right hook. He's knocked multiple guys out with it already. He mixes it up very well on the feet. He's a very dangerous striker now. He's really put in the time. And I think as long as Dos Anjos is able to keep this standing at least long enough, then he probably should be able to clip high. But if he doesn't, then you got to watch out. So I'm tentatively picking Dos Anjos, but it's not confident because you just never know with this fight. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, Jason High definitely has some interesting ingredients here, trying to make for an upset. His wrestling is outstanding. It's amazing. This statistic, 75% of his fight time is spent on the mat. That is way, way above average. I mean, he finds a way to spend time on the ground, win or lose, but he doesn't waste his time standing up. Only 16% of his time is spent standing and trading. So, we've said that Dos Anjos is probably the more technical striker. Statistically, it doesn't quite prove out that way. I think his strength of competition is probably better, than what Jason High has faced. So maybe the numbers are a little bit misleading there, but even if we assume that Dos Anjos has the advantage on the feet, he's facing a guy who finds a way not to keep the fight at a distance. He'll clinch or he'll get it to the ground. Now, what's the key question is, what is the takedown defense for Dos Anjos? His rating is 74%, which is quite high. Average should be, down 50, 60, depending on the weight class. So he has faced a lot of takedowns and he has stifled most of them. Jason High, on the other hand, his takedown offense is ridiculously high, as we would expect. He doesn't attempt a lot of takedowns. He's very successful, and when he gets them, he holds people down. So I think we've identified the scenario for how an upset occurs. Jason High lands that takedown, which dropping a weight class should be easier than it has been in the past, and he pins them down. He holds them down there for several minutes, which he has done in the past. His average time for holding people down is also extremely high. He tends to advance position. So we've seen the record. He has the ingredients to do the upset here. I think the question is how does he perform against a skilled striker who is used to having to evade people who are going after the takedown, afraid of his hands. The weight class difference kind of throws a wrench in here, but at this price, I would be a little bit skeptical for going on Dos Anjos. That's a lot of juice, and we do see elements of a potential upset for High.
All right, excellent. Now, dropping down, we have a very competitive battle expected in the flyweight division between a pair of top 10 fighters in John Dodson, who is 16-6, taking on John Moraga, who is 14-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Competitive battle, I agree. I opened it up minus 315. The comeback is plus 235, or was 235 on Moraga. The public does not agree, though. The general action has driven the line up to minus 500 right now, 5 dimes, Dodson sitting, and Moraga is plus 400. So, not much respect for Moraga. I mean, overall, typically the guy does get some solid respect. I mean, he fought for the, flyweight title already. Both these guys have fought for the flyweight title. So both of these guys are contenders, and, the winner of this fight is actually going to take a huge step forward and get back, right back in line for the title shot as well. So, these guys have fought before, we should say that as well, and it was a competitive, controversial type of decision. Now, since that time, though, Dodson, has been, of course, on the Ultimate Fighter. The guy, has taken leaps and bounds of improvement. I mean, his training camp, he's been training longer. He's had much more time with Jackson's. He's just a different version of what we saw back then in their first fight for sure. So Dodson has made those improvements. Confident-wise, his confidence can't be any higher right now. I mean, the guy has a win over current bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw, as we all know as well. So he knocked out Dillashaw in the past. Now he's fighting, to get back in flyweight contention. So that's how much pure knockout power this guy has. We all know that. We know what he's capable of. Just look at what he's done in the UFC. I mean, Dodson's just a beast, man. I mean, his speed, his power, his athleticism is remarkable. But all that being said, I think Moraga is kind of an interesting matchup for him because Moraga has solid wrestling in his own right. He's very athletic. He's got good hands. He's got tons of power as well. And if anything that Dodson, I think, doesn't do enough is actually look for takedowns and look for wrestling and look to control the fight. And, against most people, he's confident enough with the stand-up game and his movement, his speed, that he doesn't really need to do that. I think Moraga is going to make things a little interesting because he's the type of guy that kind of likes to push forward a little bit. He's going to be a little bit physically bigger than Dodson, which isn't going to be a big deal here in their fight, but I still think Moraga is going to be the one pushing forward. Dodson's going to look to move around, use that speed, and, of course, land that big shot. I don't know if it's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, again, we're going to see that scenario. I think if it hits the scorecards, we're going to see probably a very competitive flyweight decision. So I don't agree with the line we're sitting at now. I mean, I do agree with, Dodson being a solid favorite, because again, with all the improvement that we've seen, and you know what, to be honest with you, Moraga and his last couple of performances, I mean, he's had a little bit of a letdown. I mean, he hasn't looked as sharp as he can look. So I know that, he's going to be eager and excited and up for this fight, and he knows he matches up well with Dodson. So I'm expecting probably the best version of Moraga to show up in this fight than we've seen in a while. And if Dodson doesn't get rid of him, again, it's going to probably hit the cards and be pretty competitive overall. But as far as the pure pick goes, make no mistake, I mean, I'm nothing but impressed with what Dodson has accomplished.
And I agree this should be competitive, but I'm also on the side of John Dodson. Both these guys are similar in terms of age. Dodson's 29, Moraga's 30. But in terms of actual fighting skill, you gotta go with John Dodson. He's just a little bit faster, a little more explosive. I think he's got a bit more punching power, and he's a bit more diverse in terms of what he's capable of pulling off. The only real advantage I'm gonna give Moraga is he might be slightly physically stronger, and I think Moraga has a little bit better submission ability. You really never see John Dodson pull off a lot of chokes or anything. So, if Moraga gets Dodson in a bad spot, maybe he could, lock something in. But when these guys are in open space, I think that John Dodson should be able to bounce around, land some good shots, get in, get out, counter if he wants effectively. And I think Moraga will almost look like he's moving in slow motion compared to him. Now, I was really high on John Moraga. I thought he was a really good fighter, and he's definitely taken that back a notch in his most recent fights. I mean, honestly, he should have lost his last fight to Dustin Ortiz. He got a gift decision. He was out-wrestled in that fight and outworked in that fight. It was competitive, but he should have lost it. So I think unless he makes a huge rebound performance here against a significantly better fighter, then I think that he's going to look really bad potentially. Now, the one thing that could be the big equalizer here is that John Dodson is recovering from a pretty significant knee injury. He was training to compete on a high-level fight late last year and then had a horrific knee injury, and he's been out for about 6 months, a little longer, and he's finally recovered and ready to go. But I'm surprised, honestly, that he's back this quickly. So maybe he came back too soon, I don't know, but that is something. If he's lost a step, if he doesn't have that quickness, that explosion that really helped set him apart and helped him close the distance to land those big shots as a smaller guy, then maybe Moraga could catch up to him a little bit. But skill for skill, I'm going John Dodson, and that's my pick. So, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I do think that Dodson has the advantages here. His hands are fantastic. I've done the calculation on who has the most dangerous hands in the UFC, and Dodson comes out on the list. You have to factor in the fact that he's in the flyweight division. He punches way above his weight. He finds ways to knock people out. He has a very accurate power hand, and he works at a high pace. We saw him wobble Mighty Mouse a couple times. We saw him knock out TJ Dillashaw. This guy is very talented. He is very dangerous. And he is hard to take down. Now his losses in the past, I saw him drop one to, Mike Easton in the bantamweight division way back in 2008. This is near where I used to live in Washington DC. This was a regional thing. But in the flyweight division, he doesn't have that problem. His takedown defense is 81%. It's very, very good. So I don't think the wrestling will be as much of a threat, at least in the first few rounds. We did see him fatigue against Mighty Mouse. He definitely lost the later rounds, but this is a 3-round fight. I do think he has all the skills to not only win the fight, but possibly catch Moraga at some point. We haven't seen Moraga look chinny or anything. I just think Dodson is so dangerous. He is a threat to get a knockout. So I think Dodson is a pretty good bet to win. Any odds above -500 are starting to get in the realm of risky. But I do think that he is the clearest favorite on the card. I will say that.
All right, excellent. Now, moving back up to the lightweight division for the co-main event of the evening, we have Diego Sanchez, who is 26-7 overall, taking on Ross Pearson, who is 17-6 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where'd you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Tricky fight. I opened him up Pearson minus 130, the comeback on Sanchez minus 110, and the line has since been bet up for Pearson. He's now minus 185, comeback on Sanchez plus 160. Tricky fight because, man, if Pearson does not get rid of Sanchez, even though he's got a significant advantage on the feet, I mean, as far as pure striking goes, there's no doubt about it. I mean, Pearson will torch Sanchez on the feet. He continues to improve his overall takedown defense, Pearson does. He's become a solid defensive grappler, and offensively he's not bad as well. But, I mean, make no mistake, Pearson is a striker with knockout power, and that's what he does best. So he's going to look to just take Diego's head off, really. But the problem is, Diego, as we all know, very hard to stop, very hard to finish. He fights with a ton of heart, and the guy definitely has a well-rounded skill set. It's just the best attribute of Diego's game is definitely his wrestling, his grappling. But on the feet, even though he's aggressive, and I guess he's not very technical at times, he does tend to throw some wide bombs, but at the same time, he's not that sloppy. He's got some skill for sure on the feet, but he's just not that effective with his striking. I should say that. He doesn't have that huge threat to just dominate somebody on the feet, but he does throw with power. And you know what? Sanchez is getting to the point where he's getting a little bit more confident, and he's throwing a little bit harder with the shots. And Pearson, if he's shown any chink of his armor at all, it's definitely been that chin of his as well. So he has been rocked before in the past several times. He has been knocked out before. Now Sanchez is not the better striker, but he has enough power to definitely catch and stop Pearson on the feet. So I think there's an outside shot of Sanchez being successful as the fight goes on with that. So that worries me a little bit because Pearson's chin has been checked. Now, that being said, again, man, I think that it's Pearson's fight to win or lose, though. I think he should be able to stuff enough takedowns, and he should have such a clear advantage on the feet overall that he should bust up Diego Sanchez. I think he's going to swell Diego up. We all know his face has taken a lot of damage. I mean, he swells, he bleeds, and, you know, fighting 3 rounds with Pearson is not going to be very pretty for him at all. But that being said, again, if Sanchez does manage to survive, this fight is in his backyard. He does make things interesting enough where he will pin you up against the cage, look for some takedowns, and just keep on pushing forward. I mean, if you look at his decision win over Martin Kamen, which he should have never got. That was a bad decision, obviously, in my opinion, at least. But he makes the judges kind of score his way at times. I mean, just his fighting style alone. So if this is another fight that hits the cards, it is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So again, hometown advantage for Sanchez. He has that style that for some reason the judges just fall in love with the guy, in most cases. So I think he's got that going for him as well. This is not a clear-cut win for Pearson, I think. It is his fight to win or lose. I am going to pick Pearson because, again, in most cases, he should win this fight. He's a better striker. He should be able to keep it upright. And if he does that, he should have some success. But then again, at the current line, I don't see any value on Pearson. So this fight is a dog or pass situation for me. So as of right now, it's a tricky one, but I'm going to pick Pearson. But I could see some advantages on Sanchez's side for sure.
Yeah, and looking at this one, I'm much more on the side of Pearson, even though Sanchez has this knack for pulling out decisions that he probably shouldn't get. And even though Sanchez actually had an extremely competitive fight against Gilbert Melendez, I think some of the things that Sanchez has used in the past are starting to catch up to him, and maybe there's even a negative judging bias going. Like in the Gilbert Melendez fight, I mean, you probably should have given him the 3rd round of that fight, but the judges still gave it to Melendez, almost all of them. So even though he scored a knockdown. So that is something that is a concern to me as well. Now, overall, in terms of skill for skill, Ross Pearson is significantly better than Diego Sanchez. Both these guys were winners of the Ultimate Fighter, but Pearson won it about 8 seasons after Diego did. Diego was the original Ultimate Fighter. He's 32 years old, and he has a lot of wear and tear. Now, he's never been knocked out in a fight other than, the doctor stoppage against BJ Penn. But this guy has taken so much punishment in his career. It's scary how many shots he's taken throughout all the time that he's spent in the octagon, because he usually goes the distance in almost all his fights. So then he is just constantly getting tagged and moving forward and being scrappy and showing a lot of heart and having these crazy wars against fighters. And that's not really Ross Pearson's style. Pearson's a guy that would much rather try to pick you apart technically. He has some pretty good power that he's developed, especially recently. He can definitely score some big knockouts, possibly. And then I really think that, on the feet, Pearson is probably going to just slice up Sanchez, even though Sanchez is going to be aggressive and move forward and try to no-sell all the punches. And on the ground, Sanchez does have a slight wrestling advantage, although Pearson is not a slouch there either. You know, originally Pearson was more of a grappler when he won the Ultimate Fighter. He was a guy that was a threat on the mat, and he's developed into a very good striker over at Alliance MMA. And I think if Sanchez has one advantage in this fight, it's the heart and the pace that he pushes. He really just bites down on the mouthpiece and just goes crazy. And he did revert back to his Nightmare nickname. I don't know if that'll be enough to really bring back the old Diego Sanchez that people were really afraid of. Or maybe it's just a little too late, kind of like, you know, when Chris Lieben joined Alliance at the very end of his career. Those kind of things, those last minute changes. So, I don't know. But I do think that this fight will be interesting. It'll be relatively competitive, at least close in the judging scorecards, mainly because of just that's the way that Diego Sanchez fights. But I think Pearson should have the advantage just about everywhere. And, Pearson works with Miles Jury, who just absolutely obliterated Diego in their last fight in a very one-sided decision. So he knows exactly what he needs to do to win. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I think that Pearson does have the advantages here. The total head strike count that is coming in on Diego Sanchez is starting to get a little bit ridiculous. I'm going to tweet that number later this week. I've tweeted it before his last two fights. He gets hit in the head a lot, and he doesn't stop it. He expects that people will respect it and the judges will favor him for coming forward. That is not the case. They're not going to reward him just walking forward with his chin. His head strike defense is almost the worst on the card, and he's been doing it a very, very long time. So, granted, yeah, he's got a good chin. He doesn't fall down, but you just can't take those shots. He is the longer southpaw, but he's also older. So there's a few, counteracting forces here. But Ross Pearson has been very precise with his hands. That's clearly his preference, is to stand and trade. He's efficient. He evades. He hits hard. So he's got the advantages here, and Diego Sanchez cannot live the way that he has been fighting in the past and keep going and expect to stay standing. He's going to get knocked out one of these days, and once he does, it's just downhill from there. So I think Pearson is probably going to roll to a victory. Obviously, he too has to worry about Diego Sanchez's power. Diego Sanchez does hit, at his weight class benchmark for knockdown power, but he doesn't land his strikes very often. And so, him with poor accuracy, but also poor defense, that's a bad combination to have against someone with good accuracy and good defense. It's a perfect storm for Ross Pearson to simply outbox Diego Sanchez. Whether or not there's a finish, that's the inflection point that I'm wondering about. At what point does Diego Sanchez's brain just not be able to withstand this kind of punishment? And if it's not now, it's soon. So, I might be looking at some props on that one, but I do think that Pearson does have the skills to outpoint this for a decision.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, moving on to the main event, we have another lightweight battle. This time, it's between former champion Benson Henderson, who is 20-3 overall, taking on rising challenger Rustam Khabilov, who is 17-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Henderson minus 245, Khabilov plus 175. That was my opener. Line did move around a little bit, but right now back at 5 dimes, it's minus 245 again. The comeback on Khabilov is plus 205. So line just basically tightened up. And this is an interesting fight. I mean, Khabilov is definitely getting a ton of respect here. I mean, Henderson has been a very solid favorite. In most cases, I mean, you're just talking about the guy that was, a couple fights removed from the lightweight title. I mean, the guy was dominant. He's been nothing but impressive. Look at his resume. I don't really have to get into too much detail about Bendo. Most of us know what he's made of. I mean, the guy is just solid everywhere. He's one of the best grinders, one of the best wrestlers at 155, and he's been for a long time. He's got nasty power. When it comes to his leg kicks are just disgusting. I mean, he hits with so much, power and effectiveness. I mean, you can't really take much of those leg kicks for sure. His hands have developed decent enough power that he could be dangerous there, and he's just the type of grinding fighter that you love to see because he just pushes such a high pace, and he can clip you with his elbows, with his knees. His attack is just fun to watch. I mean, Henderson's definitely a solid fighter. Now, Khabilov, on the other hand, is just a different type of fighter. I mean, we all know what he's made of as far as his takedown ability, his grappling ability. That's kind of what he favors the most. I mean, the guy has crazy suplexes. He looks to take your back and just dump you on your head as much as possible. He's kind of hard, and he's got an awkward style really to adapt to. Once he gets top position, the guy has outstanding ground and pound in his own right. He has good control. He's got a good submission game. So Khabilov on the ground is a real threat to most people. But it's interesting because he is facing a guy that, I mean, even though Henderson's coming off that controversial decision win over Thompson, and Thompson seemed to dominate most of that fight, especially by taking his back and out-grappling Henderson. I'm not sure that Khabilov is going to have that kind of success, but he should be a little bit more confident. He has kind of a blueprint to follow what Josh Thompson did, so it is possible. This is an interesting matchup. I mean, I can see it playing out so many different ways. On the feet, Khabilov should be at a disadvantage, but we see that he could be very effective with his kicks. He's a little bit unorthodox on his feet as well. He's got decent hands. I mean, he did rock Masvidal in his fight. And that's impressive because we know how good Jorge Masvidal has been doing lately. I mean, he's been climbing up the ranks as well. So that was a battle, back and forth battle that Khabilov did successfully win. So he's definitely game, and I think he's going to present an interesting challenge to Henderson just with his unorthodox ability, with his ability to finish fights and be effective. So this fight can go back and forth. I think you have to give the overall advantage though to Henderson. I think he's going to know, he's a very smart game planner. He has a very solid fight IQ. He's going to know what to expect. And he's going to probably defend those takedowns, stifle the ground action completely. And overall on the feet, I do think Henderson can be the more effective striker. Now Khabilov is a little bit younger. I think he's a little bit fresher. He hasn't been through some of the wars that Henderson has, so you got to favor him in that area as well. But I do think that Henderson probably ends up grinding out another competitive, but kind of clear decision win, because I think he is going to win. If the fight does go 5 rounds, I think he's going to win at least 3 of those 5 rounds. So you got to lean, I think, Henderson by decision, but Khabilov might very well be a live dog. I mean, he's going to bring it, and I'm expecting some good things from this guy as well.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that Henderson just knows how to win fights. Granted, he doesn't know how to win them decisively very often. Most of them are very close. A lot of times they're controversial. A lot of times people are mad that he wins his fights because they thought the other guy pulled it off. But what he really knows how to do is convince judges that he won fights. He has this very distinct ability of no-selling whenever he does get hit by strikes. Despite his long hair, he doesn't really move his head around. He doesn't act like it hurt. He doesn't smile. He doesn't do all those little tricks that a lot of other fighters do. He just acts like they didn't even touch him, that it did nothing to him, and then he just keeps moving forward and works his game plan. On the feet, I do think that Henderson should have a distinct advantage in terms of kicks. He throws some really nice leg kicks, very nice body kicks, as Nick mentioned. In terms of pure punching power, he doesn't really have a lot. He's not that good of a boxer yet, despite all the training and work that he's been putting in. More of his stand-up striking is about putting pressure on the opponent, moving forward, making them move backward, him being the aggressor. That looks good for the judges. Now, Khabilov, he's not a very good striker either. You know, he definitely has a long ways to go in that department, but he does have some power. I mean, he knocked down Jorge Masvidal in his last fight, and he looked very good on the feet. I was really surprised because Masvidal is a very solid technical striker, and Khabilov was able to connect with some big bombs. Now, that being said, they weren't technical. They kind of came out of nowhere. They caught Masvidal by surprise. Now Henderson does know what they look like. He's probably going to be ready for him. So I would be very surprised if Khabilov pulled this off, on the feet at least. What this is going to come down to is the wrestling. Now Henderson, of course, has that great history of using his wrestling to dominate opponents, get some submissions occasionally, and win decisions. And as we saw in his last fight, Josh Thompson actually turned the tables on him a little bit and was able to get him on the canvas, stay on his on top of him, and even take his back multiple times despite having a broken hand. So if if Thompson can take him down, then perhaps Khabilov can, because Khabilov is a very, very good wrestler. The guy in his UFC debut was just downright scary, the way that he was suplexing Vince Pichel all over the canvas until he knocked him out from a suplex. You know, the guy is just insanely strong with his wrestling, and, you know, it's scary. So, I really think that if Khabilov is able to get inside and get Henderson down, he can keep him there. The problem, of course, is Henderson had to worry about Josh Thompson striking in that fight, so he had to balance it. And he really shouldn't have too much to worry about Khabilov striking, so he can be more focused on just keeping the fight upright if he wants to. So I think the overall well-roundedness of Benson Henderson and his ability to win decisions is going to be in his favor. This being a 5-round fight should definitely help him. He's been in multiple 5-round fights throughout his career, and this is Khabilov's first 5-round fight in the UFC. So I think that all that experience against top-level guys and his well-roundedness and the 5-round experience should really help Benson Henderson pull this one out. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I agree with you guys. I don't see either one of these guys getting a big advantage on the feet. They're both very evasive. They have excellent striking defense. And neither one of them is really, you know, the type of striker that's going to walk out and knock someone out. So with this type of evasiveness, I think it's going to be more of a point striking battle when it's on the feet. And the more interesting battle, obviously, is with the takedowns and the grappling. Now, Benson Henderson, I've seen this and hung out with this guy during his quote-unquote off-season. This is not a guy who ever gets out of shape. That's why he's able to win those 5-round fights. He hangs in there. He sticks it out. He has a clean style of fighting. You're right. He no-sells when he gets hit, and he knows how to outpoint people. And I think he's just too experienced and too clean of a fighter to drop this one. But on the other hand, Khabilov is certainly dangerous. This guy has come in and rolled through a lot of people. He hasn't really shown any holes in his game, mostly because no one has had the chance to expose one. They've been on the defense. This guy attempts takedowns so quickly, so routinely. Pretty much every minute that he's on his feet, he's going to attempt at least one takedown. Now, the key stat on that is that when he does get the takedown, he doesn't hold it for very long. Guys get up. He drags people down, but they pop back up. And Henderson is one of those guys. He's going to be very hard to keep down. And if you do get him down, he is a very, very good grappler. He's going to be going for submissions. He knows how to stay out of trouble. So I just think stylistically, Henderson has the advantages in all the right places. It depends how much can Khabilov hustle. Can he just relentlessly press the attack, constantly grabbing around the waist, throwing Henderson around, trying to just make this a drag-out war? I simply don't think you can do that for 25 full minutes against a guy like Henderson. So I think that Henderson has enough advantages to make him the probable favorite. I wouldn't want to see the line go too crazy because Khabilov still, again, has not really exposed any weaknesses. But Henderson's efficiency rating is amazing for a guy who's been in the cage with the people that he's been against time and again. He's going against the top guys. So this is probably, well, technically it's, you know, the least famous guy he's fought in quite a long time. So, I do see him going to a decision. I think these guys will be tough to finish. I don't see either one catching the other. But I think they'll grind it out, and I think Henderson will just get enough of an edge in enough rounds that he's going to win this.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 42. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday night around 8 p.m. Eastern Time, so stay tuned to that if you're an MMAOddsbreaker.com premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow @Premium Oddscast on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.